like it. You want a podcast like it? Podcast like it's 1999. Podcast like it. Just podcast like it. Podcast like it's 1999. Podcast like it. You want a podcast like it's 1999.
Hello and welcome to Podcast Like It's 1999, the podcast where we talk about the films of 1999, naked in a queer bookstore window here in 2022. I'm one of your hosts, Kennedy Nybart.
And I'm Philiskov.
Back with us, our favorites, our actual favorites.
Our actual favorites.
Our actual favorites. It's not actually Barrett Doss, like we said last week.
No.
It's actually Brooke Solomon Jordan Gustafson of the Queer Quadrant Podcast. So happy to have you guys back.
We're back, baby. It's a delight to be back. Listen.
This is
you smell that? It's the
third
smell
episode.
of books.
It smells like
Third
books.
episode.
It smells like books in here.
I was going to say,
That is my...
at least you know if you watch a movie that includes women naked in a bookstore window, you know who to call. Like, you have someone
That's
in
right.
a phone book who you can look up.
This was
true.
the thing where, like, I was looking at the list of movies we had left to cover, and I was like, we gotta have them on for Better Than Chocolate. It's like it's kind of crazy that we have recorded a 99 episode with you already, which will come out probably sometime
Eventually.
in the next couple months.
You never know.
It will come out.
Oh, and
Release
certainly will
the
come out.
tapes.
It's too hot. I don't know if the airwaves
It's
can handle
too
it.
hot. Yeah, it's Crazy in Alabama, everyone's favorite Melanie Griffith movie.
Everyone remembers that.
Everyone remembers that
wild.
film.
Tell me to
but-
recall a plot point from that movie. I don't know if I could.
I'm trying to remember
There was,
one.
I remember. Didn't Melanie Griffith solve racism or something?
There's a head
She
in
did.
a box.
She did.
Yeah,
She
the head in the
also
box.
she like flirts her way into getting someone out of prison, out of a jail cell,
Yeah.
if I remember
Herself.
correctly.
Yeah.
At one point.
In fact, I
For-
think.
Yeah, so we don't remember this well, but like,
But it doesn't
Anyway.
matter. The point is,
thing
this
about- the
movie
thing
actually
about that
makes
movie-
sense to have you guys on for,
Yeah.
considering
the
the
thing
podcast
about
we do.
any movie makes sense for you guys to have on, for
Also
Christ's
true.
sakes.
Also true.
But
Thank you,
but
Kennedy.
the thing about this movie versus Crazy in Alabama is like we can fuck around with Crazy in Alabama, say whatever you want, but like people will get on our ass if we don't get the Better Than Chocolate perfect by the minute, beat by beat.
The rabid
What-
fan base of Better Than
what-
Chocolate.
What can we say about Better Than Chocolate that hasn't already been said?
I have a few
Well-
questions actually.
Okay.
Are there things that are better than chocolate? And I don't know. This movie presupposes that this movie might
Well,
be better than chocolate, and
If
I
you've
don't
heard
think it
the
is.
song Ice Cream by Sarah McLachlan, she lists the things that are better than chocolate. Most importantly, your love is better than chocolate.
Yes.
So it
It seemed like it was
hence-
orgasms. I think that's just
Yes.
was what the
Well,
That's the movie's
that's what the
theory.
mom
If
was
you-
getting at, right?
Yes.
If you remember the hit film from 2003, Down with Love, there's a similar using chocolate to replace the pleasures of sex subplot.
Good movie.
And it's,
I mean, this is 1999. This film was made in Canada.
Hey.
Yeah, Sarah McLachlan was going to feature prominently in this.
yeah.
Like this was going to be a part of it. I as our listeners know, I'm from Canada. I don't really
No.
remember this movie. I don't.
Shocking.
I have a vague recollection of it existing.
You've been it's been on our radar for a very
It
long
has
time.
been for a while.
Mm.
Because Brooke and Jordan and I discussed a little bit a few nights ago of this movie, just very cursory kind of thing. And I do feel like
were you guys just like hanging out without me?
we were just hanging out.
Yeah,
we were
yeah.
just hanging
What the
out.
fuck?
We were
Where's
thinking
the
about
invite, guys?
we were thinking about recording an
Wow.
episode. And,
You guys are just
Um,
just doing Zoom hangouts.
Cut out.
What are we
Um,
doing tonight?
br-
We're gonna play a little Zoom Parcheesi.
Yeah.
But I-
this
I-
one
I
happens
bring
to
this
have
up-
children. Sorry.
I bring this
Sorry
up
to
because
miss
I
out.
feel like this movie now, through a 2022 lens, obviously this film isn't.
Dated?
It's dated. It's
It
very
could be
dated.
more dated, honestly.
But it could be
That's
more
true.
dated, and you gotta give them some credit for doing this in 1999.
Yes.
Like, I hit play on this movie, and I was like, okay, so this is some fucking Canadian 90s shit right here.
Oh boy.
And but I was like, they kind of throw you in the deep end. They kind of are just like they kind of take for granted the fact that people are going to be fine with this subject matter, which I think is fantastic to be that, I hate to say it, but courageous at the time. It took some courage to do that. I now look at the film and think to myself, it might be more courageous than some of the movies that are made today. Like I just, which I think is sad.
I basically don't have any qualms with this movie and how it was made in like 1999 with kind of like all of the, you know, given like where culture was at the time. I think that, yes, of course, if you look at it from like a 20 years in the future type lens, you can definitely find plenty of things to be like, well, but I don't know. I think that like that is the best, maybe the only way to watch queer cinema, especially like underseen indie queer cinema that was kind of like grappling with a lot of being like, there's not a lot of this in the marketplace. We don't really know, like there's nothing really to base it off of aside from like the other sort of messy indie queer cinema that's come before. So I think that like that's the best way to watch these kinds of movies, is not to get too hung up in the like, oh well, if it was happening today. But I totally agree with you in that there is like kind of you know, there's definitely some heavy topics in this. It does throw you like into the deep end, and I think it handles tone in a way that I don't see a queer movie, it's certainly a mainstream queer movie handling tone today. And that like there's very serious stuff juxtaposed with like extremely lighthearted stuff without a ton of like taking you gently from one to the other.
Oh yeah, whiplash, just tonal whiplash going on. I think it's like also interesting.
Quaint bookstore, hate crime.
Yeah,
and then
exactly.
back.
Well, like I think it's funny that Kenny and I, we recorded another episode today. We recorded an episode on A Single Man, the 2009 film for our Patreon. And I think it's interesting for us to be covering two overtly queer movies, both coming at it from drastically dissimilar vantage points, right? I don't even mean just subject matter wise. I mean, this film is so far from a Tom Ford picture. Like this is, you know what I mean? Like this movie is low budget. It's, you know what I mean? Like it's just not. But at the same time, I think they're both incredibly bold movies in their own way at the time that they came out. I think there's a very like interesting gender element to that comparison too, because like the Tom Ford A Single Man is very like classic like arch gay cinema, and this is very like indie lesbian cinema, and they're two like
micro budget
separate things, especially because I feel like when you get highbrow arch lesbian cinema, it's almost always made by men, and is just a lot more like stilted and structured than like this, which is like we're fucking in the shower, like you really don't, it's not nearly as common.
We're rolling around
highbrow,
the
highbrow arch lesbian cinema we're talking about is like the Carols of the world, right?
But, I mean, perfect movie, should be said.
Oh, Carol's the best. But I also think
Carol.
It's like there's something interesting about how this sort of dreamlike tone poem of a single man, right? But then you'll also have like two lesbians painting each other in like the most high school drama kind of way that also feels kind of weird, you know, dreamlike.
This is like
queers really have multitudes. I didn't see it before this. I didn't see it. I thought every queer movie was the exact same. But you could have all these crazy things over here and crazy things over there.
I am seeking someone to take me on a first date where we paint each other's bodies and then roll around on a canvas, and then it gets hung on the wall of our shared apartment.
That's very, very secure of you. The last thing I want is for anyone to be
I
put a
would
big
fucking
paint on
shoot
my
myself
body.
first. Yeah.
This is this is an A+ U-hauling movie, and I think like
it is. It's a big U-Haul film.
It gets
big U-Haul film.
They passed the U-Haul. They already took the U-Haul. They're moving. They like skipped the middle driving steps.
It's advanced U-hauling because when they get in the car to U-Haul, it's literally already
happened.
She already lives in.
We moved in together already.
So Kenny, is this our? Please.
Well, you could ask me the question I want.
This is our second bookstore rom-com, I believe, of '99. The love letter being the other one, I think.
The love letter. That is it really only our second? It's a
It's probably
genre
more.
unto itself.
Traumatized.
It feels like
I mean, we definitely did the love letter where they hang out at the bookstore a lot. I'll think of that a little more. Here's what I want. I wanted to ask you a little more substantive question. Substantive.
Yeah.
So Phil,
Mm-hmm.
you grew up in Canada. You pretty much lived in Canada your whole life until you moved here.
25 years, yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about the difference between queer culture in Canada and America and homophobia in Canada and America. What was different for you? Because I think a lot of what you were saying in the beginning in terms of how bold it is, a matter of fact it is, and all those things has to be viewed through this, like, it's a different culture lens. I mean, it's not completely different, but because when I was going to make some joke about how 1999 Canada is like 1991 America, because that's how it looks,
to that,
Yeah. Like in terms of just where they were kind of, I don't know, visually, right? And we've seen a bunch of Canadian films, which I love, but just, fucking my favorite movie last night shot on like,
home
VHS.
video, basically.
So, and that's like, I think that was all that they can get across the border in those days. So,
oh my God.
But so technologically you're in 91. Culturally, you're a lot closer to today.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, I guess the short answer to your question is that I didn't even think about it. And I think that speaks volumes, right? Like it never was something that gay people, sure. Like it was not, I was never surrounded. I mean, I think that Canada prides itself on, one of the big things is, we're not a melting pot, we're multicultural. I think that the country prides itself on being the whole spectrum of people, right? And I think that this country, and I believes in assimilation, right? Like, I think that there is very much
we always have,
right? And I think that distinction, obviously, you can be felt in the in the gay world as well. I think that I just, watching this film, I did find myself, it was pretty heartwarming, not just on a subject matter level, but just there's something quaint ultimately about how kind of nimble and sort of wide-eyed and positive and progressive a lot of the films are that come out of Canada. You just don't see that as much down here.
There was still clearly, I mean, and you answered the question flawlessly. That was important context. There's still obviously a lot of internalized trauma. Because so much of this film comes from this place of I'm traumatized. I'm traumatized because of my relationship with my parents. I'm traumatized because of the way people look at me. I'm traumatized. I mean, with the trans character, I'm traumatized because of the way I've been treated in women's spaces. And I think that it's interesting. It's an interesting thing because I do think that this film exists because I think Canada is a multicultural, accepting place. And also, queer identity is such that you never quite feel like you're not, or excluded. I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that
universal. Yeah.
I also think that ultimately, with any subculture, and I don't mean to suggest that being queer is a subculture necessarily, but just to be a minority of any sort, right?
Just
to wrap your
means like lesser. That's all.
I think it low key is a subculture though.
Like I didn't mean for it to sound derogatory.
If you engage with it in like a way that you choose to engage with like any sort of subculture, I think like it definitely fits into that bucket.
Sure. I think it's, I guess, I think it's interesting because I feel like any sort of thing that could potentially alienate you or potentially make you an outsider or whatever the case might be, if you have the courage to wrap your arms around it and be like, this is me, I don't fucking care what the ramifications are or the fallout is for this, or if there are consequences for this actions, I think that there's going to be trauma that comes with that in some form or another. Hopefully it's not something violent or terrible, but I just feel like It's just, so this is going to sound weird, but just bear with me for a second. It does make sense. I'm watching an episode of For All Mankind last night. And this really isn't a spoiler, but there's one of the astronauts, they land on fucking Mars, and he's doing a video interview, and he says that he's gay. And it's an alternate American history. So we're in the mid 90s at this point, and Don't Ask, Don't Tell doesn't exist because Bill Clinton never got elected. And there's just all of these sort of, so there's this kind of moment where the country is grappling with homosexuality in a way that it doesn't really know how to sort of articulate and how to really deal with it, especially the Republican Party. This is all just a way of saying that I feel like, you know, there's a black astronaut that turns to this gay male astronaut and says, you have the luxury of being able to hide your thing. And he's like, luxury? Like, I just think that there's something about the fact that this film, that these characters are fearless in their love, fearless in their romantic optimism and in the way that they see the world. And that's just really lovely to watch. It's basically the exact opposite of what we talked about earlier today, Kenny, in terms of someone feeling just the oppression of 1960s homophobia and just a complete lack of being able to be themselves. And unfortunately, it feels like, you know, outside of the aforementioned Bruno, when we talked about that movie, I do feel like you don't see as much. I mean, listen, I hope that Bros is great. It looks really funny. I hope it's great. I do think that you obviously can make films that are more joyous about the queer experience, but I think that there's so much trauma down here, so much more trauma down here than in Canada, that it's just, that's why I think a lot of it is about grappling with that.
And no, go for it. Okay. All right. So feel free to jump in. So I think that, like, well, trauma is an interesting word, because I agree with you on the idea that, like, there's probably going to be, if you're out about the fact that you're queer, there's probably going to be a sense of othering from someone at some point that you, like, can't avoid, and that usually does have some sort of, like, negative repercussions. Like you said, the severity that can, like, really, really vary. But I think that, like, especially in American cinema, but not exclusively, the idea of, like, the queer films usually have to be trauma focused is really, like, due to what we talk about on our show all the time, is, like, this sense of box office where it's like, you get the idea that people are not going to be as willing to show up for a queer movie that doesn't have some sort of heavy social message attached to it. You know, in the way that, like, they don't show up for a lot of, like, marginalized, joyous stories, which is obviously not the case. And I feel like that's really, like, that theory has really started to be debunked. Like, but I don't know. So a lot of these, like, really joyous queer stories, I think, tend to stick to the really, really indie spaces. And or TV. Like, TV has always been, like, a couple steps ahead of like commercial film in terms of letting queer characters, like, be happy.
Well, it's sort of like when we talked about Crazy in Alabama, and we talked a little bit about Almodovar, and we talked about how his films are, I mean, his films have a whole spectrum, but they're larger than life. The punch of these colors, all just feels very sort of like up. You don't see a ton of that here. You know what I mean? We obviously talked about Moulin Rouge and it being what it is, but again, we don't get that many of those. I mean, it's unfortunate.
I mean, just look at, like, Fire Island, which I feel like is a good example for talking about, like, things that are, like, blatantly queer while also, like, having a good story, like, an actual story to it, and, like, not about just being queer and that, like, the trauma that comes with that. I feel like sort of with this movie, I guess, like, my bumps and frustrations with it, not frustrations, but, like, I guess, frustrations are, like, one, I think that there's not really a plot. And I think that what we're talking about with this, like, joyful, like, queerness is definitely there, and that carries so much of it forward, but it's so not, like, meandering, but, like, meandering, you know, and, like, it's really hard to sort of, like, get in sync with it because it just sort of, like, feels a little bit monotonous at times. And at the same time, I think that it's really cool how they treat Judy, the trans character, and how, like accepting they are of her.
Totally.
But at the same time, then there's like so much baggage that then comes on the opposite side of that, where like so much of their trans identity and like the conversations come from like the idea of like genitalia and like surgery and everything, which is like not necessarily so much about like the trans experience, obviously. And so like it's that sort of
but I
thing.
respect that they like even ventured into those
Art,
waters.
No, for sure.
It's also
in 99.
very 1990s.
That's the thing, is it's
to
just
be
like
that's like it's so crazy. Like the more I feel like we talked about this probably on the Bruno episode, honestly, about like the different subsections of like the queer community and how like sometimes everyone is in sync and sometimes everyone is kind of like fighting with each other, and what is considered kind of like progressive at the time changes so rapidly. Like I feel like there was a big sort of like push in the 90s to be like, we're recognizing trans people by being like, yes, it is kind of about your genitalia, but only because like we want to get people more comfortable with that and like get it more into the mainstream. And I feel like that has really changed now.
But then you also
like,
have like Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, or something along those lines. Like I think that America, and maybe even the world at large, really had trouble distinguishing or grappling with drag queens, trans.
God,
It's a very
This is the same year as Boys Don't Cry, which is like
it is.
I think a very, very different portrayal of like
Oh,
how we should be seeing trans people on screen. Like it's exactly what
and
we
a
were
much
talking
better
about.
movie on a myriad of levels.
But
I,
traumatic, like
but
so trauma focused.
Literally based on trauma.
Yeah.
Boys do cry.
Oh,
they do.
They do.
They do.
Yeah. Go ahead, Kenny.
I think the conversation about trauma obviously is interesting and probably a little traumatic, to be honest. No, I've seen it. I've seen it. You know, not with. I've never worked on a gay focused show, but I've worked on several shows that were Black focused, and so many of the Black writers just push so hard against stories about Black pain and Black misery, Black trauma, and you can feel the trauma of the experience of watching portrayal after portrayal after portrayal about how hard your life is told by people who aren't you, which must be really fucking weird, and like
it doesn't help with the conversation either, if we're being completely frank. It doesn't.
I mean, we're years past that, right? We're just decades and decades and decades past, like, basically opening the door up to this stuff. At this point, that's why people push back really hard against that show. What was the show on Amazon? Them, right?
Yeah.
Which was just a lot of
trauma,
and it's like,
it was also just really gory and really just really tough to watch.
And it was, and I do think people are really just kind of over it. And honestly, when I say people, I really mean Black people. Like, it really is just like they're just not interested in that kind of stuff anymore. So, I mean, not to speak on behalf of Black people, but that's my sense. And I think with certainly mainstream queer cinema, that's what we have been seeing forever and ever and ever. And I think we still see it to this day. And I guess like a Bros here, a Fire Island there, like those, like, honestly are, in my opinion, huge leaps forward.
And it just like happened just fucking decades ago. Like, it's crazy that we're I mean, it's nuts.
The fact that Fire Island, and I think this is a great thing, Fire Island came out and like wasn't the subject of a million fucking profiles and magazine things and everyone. It just I think these are I think this is a good thing, but I think it is probably frustrating for you guys to talk about these movies over and over again and like have this like be like, what I mean, what's all this shit about? I don't know. So,
well, that's why I think, just to not to speak for you guys, but that's why I think your podcast is so great, because I don't think and I truly mean that, I don't think your podcast, like, what I appreciate about your podcast is the fact that you guys are watching all movies and looking at it through the lens of how queer is this? What are the queer components of this? Rather than sitting down and just watching quote unquote queer movies and talking about where they rate on
fall into a deeper depression.
Right. that was kind of my point, right? Which is that I think that that there's a queer component to all sorts of movies, and I think that that's what we should be talking about rather than just sort of, as Kenny said, focusing on the trauma and the darkness and the I
think that's what makes this movie so interesting is like it does. My big takeaway is that this feels like a film that a BFA student at a college would make, specifically like Emerson, where I went to school. I'm like, this is a BFA movie.
I wonder.
Because it's just like artsy and like, oh my God, like this love story, and we're painting each other.
So
like you can very much like feel like this, like you're in your early 20s. You're like, oh God, I have so many creative ideas. And at the same time within that, you're like, but I have to like make it about my identity because I'm like struggling, and like, let me throw in all these hate crimes. I feel like that's what's so weird than watching this movie where you're like, oh, this is like a nice romance. Like it's about like, can we talk to my mom about like my relationship? Like, how's that? And then all of a sudden it like takes that hard right turn into literally, and you're like,
white supremacy.
back up. We were good with like just the romance happy vibes. Like you didn't need to throw in all the other stuff.
It's funny because it feels like, and you mentioned this earlier, Jordan, about how it's kind of just a sort of shaggy hangout movie, right? Like it's a romance between these two attractive young women, and one sort of dealing with her sort of the blossoming of her queerness or whatever you want to call it. And then, one woman being sort of openly out. But then I would also say too, like the first time they had coffee, they kiss. Like there's no fucking like lateness to their relationship.
Yeah.
Both characters are out to begin the movie.
Right.
I mean, it's not really like it's.
But Maggie's a little less so. Maggie seems to be a little. She certainly isn't out to her family.
Yeah, but I mean,
she performs at game club and works at the gay bookstore.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying that her mom's not dumb for not putting it together, but
her mom's a fucking idiot.
Her mom is a horrible character. Yeah. It's like,
although I love when she gets all the sex toys, but that's whatever.
That's a good scene.
The first thing I thought of is you don't use someone else's vibrator.
I was like, did you wash them?
Wash
it.
I mean,
gross.
Yeah,
gross. And then on top of it,
find a random vibrator. Come on.
The fact
not just like one vibrator. It's like it's
a box of them.
70 vibrators in this house.
And she doesn't know that they're not her daughters, right?
Yeah.
Like we find out later, but when she first used them, like, what are we doing?
Hey,
so many questions.
But anyway, vibrator.
Anyway, I think that like to really quickly speak on like sort of the idea of
vibrators.
We love
obviously
of analyzing quote unquote straight movies through a queer lens. I think that, and again, if you listen to our show, I'm sorry that you have to hear us regurgitate this point that we make often, but like we are so much more interested in connecting to the wide variety of characters that you find in like more traditionally straight movies, because so many queer movies are tied to trauma, or they're like really, really ooey gooey wholesome, which is like cute, but does like tend to lean a bit one-dimensional. And you just don't, again, it's like you don't get to experience a ton of queer people like fighting alligators in the jungle or whatever you want to do.
But
so
I do think that like 2/3 of this movie are kind of just shaggy, hang out, aren't lesbians cute, they're so in love, isn't this great? And then, as you said, it makes a fucking hard turn in the third act to be like, go big or go home in the third act. And you're like, okay,
right.
We didn't need to do this.
People are oppressed, and we gotta address that real quick.
I'm Joan of Arcing myself in this bookstore.
Like the fact that this spoilers were better than chocolate. So sorry to everyone. But
how
like,
dare you?
I know.
Everyone's seen it.
Yeah, everyone's seen it. It was My Big Fat Greek Wedding. It was everyone's favorite romantic comedy. Yeah.
The fact that this movie ends with literally like a block blowing up is
it's crazy,
insane.
Yeah, it's like do the right thing at the end in a weird, crazy way. Like I mean, it's not. I'm not going to make a false equivalency, but you know what I mean.
No, I don't know. That's not a bad comparison.
There is similarly how there's no kind of like foreplay besides them starting to make out in a coffee shop. There's no like falling action. There's no come down. It's just like immediately credits. Here's a super quick clip show of what everyone ended up doing in the next year.
Which is also unhinged.
Which is crazy too. The whole like it's like American Graffiti on like I don't know what the fuck. Like it's crazy how everything gets so dialed up at the end. So I do want to give a synopsis because unfortunately I don't think that many people have seen Better Than Chocolate. Not long after moving into
out there. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Really Wonka.
Sorry.
Yeah. Not long after moving into her own place, Maggie finds herself with two unsolicited roommates, her recently divorced mother, Lila, I think, and her younger brother. The timing is especially bad considering Maggie has fallen hard for an attractive woman named Kim only hours before they move in. What could be a non-issue becomes increasingly complicated since Maggie's family is unaware of her sexual orientation and Maggie is not open to sharing that information. Better Than Chocolate opened on Valentine's Day, 1999. It made a little under $2 million on a $1.6 million budget, which, listen, they made a profit, whatever. It's got 46% on Rotten Tomatoes from critics, 78% from audiences. The New York Times said the movie gushes with so much romantic optimism and good humor that it has the effervescence of an engaging musical comedy. Sure, I don't disagree with that. I think that I think this movie has the best of intentions. I think we all agree that this movie is progressive and has a big heart. I don't know that it really gets underneath the surface of it though. Like I think it's all sort of there, and I would say in 99 the surface is maybe enough, right, for people that are maybe uneducated or unaware of this, culture.
It feels like a good movie for like a high schooler to watch and like to then feel like, oh, like this is the community. It's like that first sort of step, like an introductory. It's like it's literally like Queer Cinema 101 or whatever, like totally. We're like, what is like a nice light movie that I can watch that like teaches me the issues and like gives me a little bit of the community, and like that's what this like movie's doing.
It's like a picture book that a parent would give their child if they don't want to have the conversation about sex.
Right. If like the kid's like 16 and is like,
a vibrator? We got you.
I heard you say lesbian once.
Yeah. I think it like weirdly though, the movie tries to have its cake and eat it too, because it is very like gushing and romantic, but then like we said, it also has so many social issues. I can't believe this is reminding me of Crazy in Alabama, but do you remember how that movie is like half cavorting
that movie's like
trip and half 1960s had racism. I don't know if anybody knew this.
Two different movies.
Yeah, like it's so I think that it could get away with being more surface level if it didn't feel the need to shoehorn in all of like the very serious social issues that it needs.
I think this movie is a little more nimble than Crazy in Alabama in terms of in terms of dealing with issues.
I would like to say we in your synopsis and in all this conversation, I don't know how many minutes in, it is disgusting and despicable that we have not talked about the best character in this movie. And I don't know the guy's name, but it's the one who like works next to the store. And he's like, hey, look at these lesbians. Oh my God. I forgot. Mamma mia. What am I doing here?
It's
You're kissing
incredible.
the girls.
I love how his first or second scene before we don't know anything about him is like, hey, you can't kiss in the store. And we're like,
and then they
what
kiss.
the fuck is this guy? And then by the end of the movie, we're like, Tony, is he okay?
It's a crazy portrayal of people that are not gay. Like the not gay people are basically cartoon characters.
Insane.
Which I love because that's true to life. That's what I'm going for on a regular basis.
That's awesome. It's pretty progressive TBH to just make all of your straight people the insane stereotype.
They're all goofballs. It's really good.
Really
Your mom is a total goofball.
Oh my
God.
There is a brother in this movie who gets a girl.
You don't remember him when they're fucking out on the outside on some weird like it's like a small love seat or some shit like that, or like
a fuck pad. Yeah.
No. It was outside. It was like a fucking car.
A heterosexual car.
There was something.
Spot.
Hold on, because there's something. It's at the end.
Mamma mia, you're having
there's
sex.
a butt plug. She puts the butt plug in.
Hey,
remember?
She's a bisexual trying to get her new straight boyfriend to like experiment a little bit.
I'm not against butt plugs. I was just like a little surprised that it happened.
Phil, that's the record.
That's actually where I draw the line. So, you're making jokes over here. Come on, it's a family podcast.
Great predatory bisexual trope in this one. Really excellent.
You should have put that on the poster. Great predatory.
Better than chocolate. Predatory bisexual.
I actually
we'll turn you gay.
She's kind of a blast, though. I love her.
Yeah.
I like when they're like talking about the omnisexual at one point, and they're like, it's like the tornado in the Wizard of Oz, and I'm like, what does that mean?
What does it
like,
have to
are
do
you
with
just
anything?
fucking so many people you cause a storm?
Oh, you didn't know that every gay movie is legally required to have a Wizard of Oz reference?
Right.
Given
Like, did you know
Can I just say that, like,
Island?
you're setting the bar really high if you're saying it's like a fucking tornado, because like that person might not be able to like actually give off
live
tornado
up,
vibes.
live
You know,
up to the expectations.
Undoubtedly,
Are you
they
giving
are not.
tornado vibes?
It's just a tornado of penises. That's all. I think they. But I
dildos?
know, of course, so many dildos in this
So
movie.
many dildos.
Yeah, I was thinking about the Wizard of Oz because the Wizard of Oz.
As you do.
The Wizard of Oz is a real joyous movie, and I think that what's interesting about your podcast, and now let's talk about your podcast.
Yeah, sounds great.
Is
Sure.
movies that are queer coded
Yes.
have always been joyous.
Mhm.
There's always you strip the film of that need to comment on how difficult it is to be an oppressed minority in this country.
Yeah,
And you
we
can
already
just have-
know. We're aware.
and you just have like funny allusions to sex all the time.
Mhm.
And it just seems like a lot of fun, like a big fucking party. That's what's cool about your part.
Better
your
than
podcast.
chocolate. A big fucking
thank
party.
a big fucking party.
No,
It's like
better
fucking
than-
a tornado.
Better than chocolate is like like to me, better than chocolate is better than chocolate for the straights, because like that's just what it is. It's like,
Just like a little
it
boring.
just for the straights, like this. Here's a little, here's a little peek. Take a look, and you'll see some lesbian sex over here, and some body painting, some trauma porn over there. All these little things that feel like this is some stuff that us straights, have heard gay people are up into, and things that are happening over there in Gayville, and we'll put it all on screen. And so it does feel very much like it really does. I actually don't think you should show children this movie. Unlike you, Brooke.
You've done a full about face on this.
No, I haven't. I don't think it's a great film.
Okay,
I
wait.
look.
I don't.
No,
I
was just. I mean, I
didn't
just
love
mean.
it. To be clear, I'd give this.
I never.
We're gonna rate it. Don't you worry, guys. We're gonna rate this.
Kenny,
all my
you do have a good
notes.
jump
point
the
in
gun.
that, though. I think Kenny, like other than showing a child this film, I do think you made a good point about like for the straights, and I think that there is an interesting subsection of queer movies that are like not like for the straights, but that feel that they're tailored and they're made in a way that like are what we sort of talked about before, and like with this movie where they're accessible for like mainstream audiences to feel comfortable watching, where it's like queer culture, but it's so distilled in a way that feels somewhat like heterosexual, or at least like there's a clear like one-to-one where you can feel comfortable watching it. And I feel like honestly, my brain, the first thing I thought of was like Happiest Season, and I feel like that's a very like kind of clean, it's very like nice and wholesome, and I feel like that's sort of like the queer things that are like digestible for like straight audiences.
That's a great
I'm happy
example.
to talk about Happiest Season, but
we
I
don't
think
need
it's
to, no.
But I think to me it's something a little different, and I'll make my point succinctly. There are really only 3 villains in this movie. One is the Canadian government, obviously a villain.
Of course.
Always has been a villain. The other is a lesbian woman who beats the shit out of Judy in the bathroom.
Yeah.
And the third are neo-Nazis. So if you're a nice straight person, you don't see yourself in this movie except represented by these, silly caricatures.
The mom.
But
and,
if anything, you see yourself. If anything, like I think a reasonable person sees himself in Vinny the Pizza Man or whatever his name.
Mamma mia!
I think if anything, you see yourself in that, and you're like, yeah, that's who I am. I'm
Vinny the Pizza
I'm
Man.
the good ally who maintains my identity, but is nice to people. So I do think this really is like, truly, like, quote unquote, for the straights. I think when you have a movie like this that doesn't actually, I'll give you the other example that I was thinking of. Boys Don't Cry is another example of this, because Boys Don't Cry is very much, in my opinion, for the straights. Now, it's Boys Don't Cry. The villains in that movie aren't the government. They aren't, doctors. They aren't all the people that made Brandon's life miserable. They're these crazy ass fucking hicks. Yeah. These crazy ass, like, racist rapists, right? People who, like, any reasonable person would be like, I identify with Brandon and not the people raping her. Excuse me, him. I identify with them. So the idea is, like, put people on screen that doesn't comport to the audiences, a mainstream audience's version of themselves, so they can start to sympathize and empathize with the queer character on screen. But I think that though, I don't know, I'm not slogging Boys Don't Cry at all, because I think it's a brilliant movie, and I think an early mainstream-ish trans movie kind of has to present itself that way. But I don't think this movie had to present itself this way. I think this movie's somewhat insecure in the way it's presenting itself.
I think insecure is a really good.
I think that's apt. Yeah. I think that I'll say this though, because I do think that, you mentioned, Jordan, that it feels like a film from a film student or something along those lines, and I tend to agree to a certain degree. I think that the thing is that this movie kind of wants to just be these two women hanging out, right? Like, it kind of wants to be a Richard Linklater movie where they just chat and then they fuck and roll around in paint and then there's credits. Like, that's, I think, ultimately what the film to be.
Yes.
But then they realize, well, it has to be a movie that people go and see. So we have to inject things. And I think what you're picking up on, Kenny, and I don't disagree, is that there's a disingenuous quality to some of the plot mechanics that's going on in it, because it wants to be a big boy movie. It wants to be a movie that feels about things, right? And things happen, and there's turns, and there's things that will stay with people, because there's a fear, I think, in a lot of your talkie movies. I say that, your Richard Linklater movies
and the talkies,
which are tough, right? Because, like, it's tough to get people to fully engage in those movies. Kenny and I have talked on many occasions about the before movies and how it's a miracle to watch those films because they're just so fucking compelling. Yeah, but, like, that's like, it's so few of them can pull that off.
Exactly.
And it's because you have Richard Linklater and those actors and that dialogue, and then you see, it's like with people who, like, want to do Malick, and then you see the knockoff Malicks, and you're like,
don't do
Terrence
it.
Malick does Terrence Malick because he's him. Yeah. You shouldn't be touching this. And I think it's like knowing, not to be like stick in your lane, but like, it's about, like, as a creative, like, trying to, like, stay authentic to yourself. And I think, like, not trying to crib from something. And I think that if this movie, I don't know much about, like, what happens later on in this person's career, etc. But, like, I think
not
ultimately, no, not really. But
as with the case with most Canadian filmmakers, unfortunately.
Oh, the syrup got to them. Oh no!
Oh my god!
Yeah.
Sorry.
Too much poutine.
The syrup got to them.
Like, they're stuck. They can't move.
Yeah. The career syrup.
Yeah, of course. Yes, the career up.
But no, I think it is about, though, like, this movie is trying to throw in so much just because the insecurity of it. And I feel like that's where the third act, where you really start to feel it, because it is like, we have to wrap up our movie. We should leave people with, like, a theme or, like, a statement, and, like, what's gonna be, like, what are you walking out with? And I think you can even see it sometimes in a little bit of cinematography, where there's, like, they try to do, like, the 90s tricks, like when they like fast forward the footage, so they're, like, walking super fast around the store, and you're like, this feels so out of place within the context of what was happening, like, 5 minutes ago. Like, it just doesn't feel genuine at times to it,
Their movies. Sorry, because the do the right thing is, a somewhat apt comparison to me. And we did it in our 89 pod, and I think it's like, the best movie of the fucking 20th century.
It's a fucking masterpiece.
Good movie.
And part of it is because it dares to make the villain so fucking relatable.
Yeah,
like it
exactly.
dares to make Danny Aiello so relatable that people walk out of that movie and struggle with what happened at the end of that film. They really struggle, and you really have to grapple with, as a white person, you really have to grapple with who you are in that film, because you're not John Turturro. I get that, right? You're not the guy who's like being an open racist, but like you're probably Danny Aiello in that movie, and that's like you really have to just struggle with like with are you doing enough? Are you taking other people's culture? Are you taking other people's property? Are you encroaching where you shouldn't be encroaching? Should you be? How do you all these things? And when you think about villains in these kind of big theme movies, I think about a movie I really like called The Contender. I'm sure you all saw it. Joan Allen. Yeah. The villain of that movie is Gary Oldman, mustache twirly fucking Republican senator
fucking asshole.
who doesn't look like any of us. Right?
Yeah.
He's the easiest guy in the world to villainize. Like the bold move is to take someone who looks like they're an ally and they're actually not.
Yeah.
And
it's like the internalized homophobia, and like where it's like the villain is like you're looking at something and you're like, oh, this person's so deeply related, and there's that one turn or that one small thing where you're like, oh, that you're like, you don't like this person because of X, Y, or Z. And I feel like, speaking of like Fire Island, I think does like in a pretty decent way where you're like looking at like the internalized racism and like body shaming and like within the confines of like the queer community and how certain subsects and people like view and judge other people even within a community. And I feel like I completely agree with what you're saying is like this movie would be so much stronger if instead of it was a fucking Nazi, it was like when you have that lesbian attack, I think in the bar, I think that is interesting. I think there's a kernel there where it's talking about like the infighting within the queer community and sort of that transphobia. And I think that is an interesting facet that the movie digs into. And so you sort of wish that
I agree with that.
The overarching villain, or at least like the themes within like what are the conflicts within the community at some point, but that's not what the movie has on its mind at all.
When it also doesn't really lay a ton of piping in terms of where these white supremacist Nazis, what have you, they really just kind of come out of nowhere. So
they're monsters.
Sure. But I just mean if we had the sense that I'm
saying the same thing.
Yeah, the same thing for the Judy storyline too. Like, you know, it's like there's not, I think like the movie is so refreshing because up until that point, it's extremely like non-transphobic in terms of how people are talking to her. And like, she has this like incredibly supportive community and like she's doing good in people's lives and is like a super important part of the core ensemble. And then it's just, again, there's not really a lot of groundwork laid. But I think that like, you know, the reason that something like Do the Right Thing is in such a league of its own is because that balance of being like, you want to introduce a relatable villain who does in a way inflict trauma on your more marginalized like main characters, but everything, you feel like the movie strikes an incredible and really important balance by the end. It's so difficult to do because it's the same thing. You have, you know, with the bathroom scene with Judy, you have a villain who maybe some viewers can relate to, but the balance is not there. Like it's too much, too fast, too quick. Like no one is going to be like, oh shit, maybe that's me, because it's so intense. So quickly.
I mean, part of it is also in the specificity, right? Like I'll just say this. It's unfair for us to compare Better Than Chocolate to Do the Right Thing.
Yes.
But I'll continue the metaphor because I do think that there's something there. I do think that, I mean, Do the Right Thing, the sheer amount of unbelievably specific characters, the bench of characters that exists in that film is insane, right? Like you feel like you know that corner of the world so unbelievably well. This film similarly is you know, about a corner or a neighborhood, and yet the specificity of everyone outside of basically 3 or 4 characters they just kind of they bleed into the woodwork. It is unfortunate. I do want to add just a couple pieces of context that I think are worth giving here. So the plotline about the bookstore is a fairly direct reference to a Vancouver bookstore, Little Sisters Book and Art Emporium, and the various problems that it had with the Canadian customs. The bookstore is thanked in the credits. The bookstore owner is a fairly well-known Canadian author, Anne-Marie MacDonald, who has written several quite successful Canadian books, or books, period. They're not Canadian, they're just books. But I do think that I didn't know she could act. And in fact, this is the only time she's ever acted. I believe she might have been a producer as well in the film, if I'm not mistaken. She was quite good. I thought she was actually surprisingly, I mean, I would argue that the relationship between her and Judy, and the bookstore owner's name, forgive me, I don't know what the owner's name is off the top of my head, is a more interesting relationship than the one between our two leads. Because the one between our two leads is just wide-eyed, horny lesbians. Like, they're just, which is great. I mean, no, I'm not dogging it, but I do think that there isn't a ton of obstacles there other than the fact that it feels as though Kim is a little bit more experienced and is a little bit sort of, quite frankly, annoyed with Maggie's lack of experience at times. Whereas the Judy relationship is a lot more complicated and a lot more interesting.
Yeah, and I think like massive props to the film for having a relationship between, a cis lesbian and a trans woman where the issue that's like keeping them apart has absolutely nothing to do with the fact that Judy is trans, and is more about just like, I don't know if I'm ready for a relationship. Like, it's wonderful. And I think that like, it's definitely more interesting just because it has like ups and downs, and it feels like it has like authenticity to it in the way that the young
and again it comes back to sort of the specificity of it. It doesn't feel like something we've seen before. I gotta ask you guys what you think about the brother watching his sister have sex with another woman.
Not great.
2 thumbs down.
Weird. I also think it's
bizarre.
I also just think it's really funny that the woman who he ends up with, the aforementioned slightly aggressive bisexual woman who also works at the bookstore, is like so invested in trying. Is her name Maggie the main character? I'm so sorry.
Yeah. Maggie's the main character.
Like so interested in trying to kind of like get Maggie, and then the second that her brother walks in is like, never mind.
I want that guy.
Yeah,
I'm trying to think of I'm looking at the cast names. The brother is Paul.
What's his name? Paul. He gets, Paul, I kind of feel
Francis is the bookstore owner.
The bookstore owner. Paul gets a little shafted, literally and figuratively. Maybe.
Nice. He gets
because like they just don't, he has nothing to contribute really. Negative things to contribute. I think that the scene
he contributes being creepy and watching his sister have sex.
I mean, assume that weird. Scene is meant to raise the stakes with like, oh no, is he accidentally or purposefully gonna out his sister?
But then like it doesn't
go there. But I also wonder if it's about him. I think it's twofold. I think it's what you just said in terms of just the stakes of the plotting. But then I also wonder, is it about him expanding his mind in terms of what is possible?
We'll never know because he only has like 2 lines in the entire movie.
Yeah, he disappears and then he gets a butt plug in the end. It's not a lot. He doesn't have a lot to bring to the. I do think I want to talk for a second about the soundtrack, which is so 90s and so much like hippie folk lesbian emo rock. It's crazy. It's amazing. I
really loved the opening number.
Same.
Like, I felt like I watched it twice. I thought it was like electric.
It's great. It has some real life to it, and like the fact that they go the performance sequences are kind of like low-key the best thing in the movie.
God, I mean, Judy's song is fantastic.
Excellent.
I totally agree. It's like there is this weird like cabaret element to it.
Yes.
Where you come back to this club and let them do the whole performances, and they talk to the movie, or at least they're supposed to. But I thought that was definitely the best part of of the
I
film.
also appreciate that they
And a
throw you in
unique
the
aspect.
they throw you right in the deep end, right? You don't get your title credits for, I think it's until 5 or 10 minutes into the film, after the sequence that Kenny was speaking of, which I kind of love. I love a movie that doesn't give you the title right away, that kind of is like, sink or swim a little bit. The blacklight musical
Is this the
sequence.
movie I was supposed to see?
Yeah, there's the blacklight musical sequence as well, which is bizarre, but kind of great. I have to agree that the music stuff is a real shot in the arm. Like when that's happening, you're at least kind of like, okay, you have my attention. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would have been, I actually think that this movie would have been basically a slam dunk if it was like maybe 1 or 2 more musical numbers. And then, like we said, Linklater hangout movie.
Yes.
Like give us the 2 queer female driven storylines, like, and a bunch of musical numbers. And like, this is,
I really did not.
The thing about Cabaret is Cabaret also uses Nazis really effectively. So
much more effectively. Yeah,
very much so.
Well, the thing
if
about
they could find their Nazi moment just like that, that'd be. But that's, I mean, I don't want to get into Cabaret, but that's that's
it's a better movie.
That's the whole.
It's a much better movie.
It is a better movie, but there is the beauty of that.
It's the same shit. Like we were saying, it's the same sort of like trauma-driven thing that like makes the social aspects of Better Than Chocolate like a little bit of a bummer, is that it's like it is really ingrained in a lot of the queer community. Like I think especially the like lesbian focused bookstore is so funny to me, where they're like at Canadian Customs being like, why isn't like 500 ways to use the clit allowed into the country? It's like, I love it so much. And I think that like there's clearly parts of this movie that are made very much for the queer community, which makes when they're like, guys, did we all forget that neo-Nazis hate gay people? It's like, no, we not remember. Really. We remember.
Yeah. It's interesting because when she...
that is maybe my favorite scene. Is when she's just like, scene? Little Red Riding Hood should be allowed in the country. Like, what is going on? I love bureaucratic anger, especially when it's from, like a 5'2" lesbian.
I'll say this: when she paints herself and she put in the window, right?
Yeah. Oh God, yeah.
I really thought, okay, because forgive me if I imagined this, but is it not on the news? I think it's on the news, right?
They're gonna go get the press. I don't know if it ever comes to fruition because the building blows up. But that is where Frances goes, and that's why she's not there.
Yeah.
My brain
just off camera, there was a person who came with the big press thing on her hat. So
and like
it's
a
Tony
and
Soul in his ear, and
a
little notepad.
McAllister ear down at the local lesbian bookstore.
But I bring this up because I feel like the movie, in my mind, was going to end with it's on the news, it becomes a whole thing, there's a protest or something like that, and then we get credits. And ultimately, that's where it should have gone, right? I mean, I understand the fact that they wanted to show that there are people that are not for this lesbian bookstore. Fine, so be it. But they went to 11 when they really just needed to go to 6 or 7, because what it also does is the chyrons at the end are like this kind of happy-go-lucky kind of goofy shit.
Yeah,
it's just like, wait, we just had Nazis, guys.
Right.
Yeah,
like you can't go. You just went too far with Nazis. It should have just been, some fucking I don't know, some right-wing parents protesting the bookstore or some
people
shit like
almost
that.
died. I think that the bureaucratic element is like almost the most interesting aspect of like we were talking about, the kind of like insidious, like under the radar homophobia, where it's like we don't consider these books appropriate,
right?
Why not? Like it's sort of digging into that, and like the back and forth that goes on there is much more interesting. And I think just much more fitting for like the scale of this movie.
Well, that's and also just the tone of it. Like it just would have flattened it out a little bit in the sense of it feeling a little bit more of a piece, because I just think that they just, again, not to belabor the point, but had they not gone as far, I think that it all just would have felt a little smoother, and I would have been okay with kind of cross-cutting between Maggie's mom using what she thinks potentially are Maggie's sex toys, cross-cutting with the brother getting railed with a butt plug, and then the Nazis. can't have these things
One of these
together.
things is not
One
like
of these
the
things does not
other.
belong.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, it's just it's it's too
It's so
much.
insane.
It's too much.
So yeah,
I think about this film premiering
Yes.
at TIFF, and I cannot imagine what it was like just sitting in the theater being like, what a nice little, oh my god.
What the fuck? Well, I wonder what like
Anyway.
the Cannes like standing ovation versus boo ratio would be if it was at Cannes instead.
As if this movie would ever.
but I gotta say, for what it's worth, the film screened at festivals around the
It
world.
screened
It
at TIFF.
ranked 31st on the Hollywood Reporter's top 200 independent films of 1999. I'm not sure there are 200 independent films.
Wait,
of
wait, wait, wait,
1999.
wait. Can we get that list?
I gotta find that list.
I was gonna say,
I mean,
y'all might need
is
it.
that like counting like high school
Jeez.
movies?
Is
like,
there?
what are we talking about here?
Can you think of 200 independent movies from '99, Kenny?
Not off the top of my head, but
I just didn't think there were
30
that many. I mean,
if
I
it's
could think.
if it's 31, that interests me because in
Maybe
'99 we
50.
were talking Searchlight
Some
movies for
fucking
independent.
bangers, yeah.
I was gonna
Miramax were
say.
independent.
Yeah.
It's like you're talking
Yeah.
probably 60-70% of the movies we've done.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
I
it's
think that
probably
seems a little
anything that's
crazy, but
not
who knows?
universal.
Even indie films, I mean, I'm
But
sorry,
it did-
even foreign films were all kind of considered indie movies at that point.
Mhm.
Docs, there's so many great docs.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
I think if you want to do it, I'll do it. So, Being John Malkovich was an indie movie.
I'm gonna see if I can find this list.
Magnolia. I'm kidding, but
No, I'm serious, though.
You have 198 more to go.
I think I could name 200 if I had to.
If you,
Yeah. Better Than Chocolate.
Of
Better Than
course.
Chocolate, yeah.
This is also I don't I feel like you guys cover this. This is the same year also as But I'm a Cheerleader, which I feel like is that
Correct,
same
correct.
sort of like I think a much better
Much better
balance
movie.
between like for the community and also something that is kind of very interesting to watch as
Yeah.
like an outsider
Sure.
and so satirical, but also really has something to
Well,
say.
that's the thing. I mean, that
And-
movie's
yeah.
clicking on a bunch more levels. It's also
Yeah.
attempting to do something that I would argue is more difficult, and
Yes.
thus
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
success. If you are successful at doing those things, you're immediately going to seem like.
Yeah.
I mean, this movie. And again, I know that we're kind of picking it apart. I think that it's not striving.
What are you gonna do?
No, and that's fine. I don't think that it's striving for much more than showing people that perhaps don't have positive perspectives on homosexuality or the gay culture, that like there's nothing to be afraid of here. This is just they're just they're beautiful lesbian women that love each other. Who cares? Like there does seem to be that component to it, and because its goals are so modest, it makes the film feel modest because they're just. I mean, I as I said earlier, I think that the Francis and Judy relationship is striving for more. I think that relationship is trying to sort of shine a light on something that, quite frankly, isn't even particularly being well done now, let alone in 1999. I mean, I think that I love at the end of Judy's song when she says, "I'm not a fucking drag queen." Like, I think that like that is bold, sharp rhetoric of a group of people that are just not getting spoken about.
Yeah.
Yes, Boys Don't Cry does an infinitely better job at unpacking those issues in a much more complex and much more harrowing journey that movie is.
Yeah.
They're aiming for two very
Completely
very different
different
Yeah, and
things.
that's the thing is
So
that Judy's so comfortable with like who she is, and I think
Yeah.
like as kind of we were talking about was sort of like where the trans conversation was at this point in 1999. I mean, you even see it in the casting. Like Judy is played by a cis male actor,
Mhm.
Yeah.
Peter Outerbridge, but I will say I think it's a very good performance. Obviously,
too.
like should definitely have been played by a trans actor, but again, like we said,
right for the
Mirrors, Boys
time,
Don't Cry.
right?
Like
yeah.
we're not like picking it
Yeah.
apart by like 2022 standards, but I was very impressed with the performance. It
It didn't feel like
not at all. It's a really a wonderful performance.
it could have been like
Did-
stereotypical
Could've
and like a
been.
way where you're like, this is like really uncomfortable to watch, and it's not.
But in talking about, cis actors playing trans roles, which clearly did not stop in the year 2000, like this is like miles ahead of so many portrayals that we saw
I
in
agree.
later
Yep.
years and on much
Yeah.
bigger stages.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that God, this is probably way out of my depth, but
We got you. We'll help you.
thank you guys. I only think one of the three actors in Tu Wong Fu comes close to handling this correctly.
Yes, who
And
is
the
the three?
I don't want to say yet, but the other two I feel like are constantly protecting their masculinity. And I don't feel like
Yes.
Outer Ridge is. The one is, I'll tell you, it's John Leguizamo. I think he.
I was gonna say, is he in Moulin
I,
Rouge?
I think he fucking murders it in that movie, and I think he's like
He
a
is good.
revelation. But I felt the whole movie like Patrick Swayze and Wesley Snipes were just protecting themselves, and there was always a wink of, I'm playing a character. This isn't really me.
Yeah.
Where Leguizamo really kind of completely owns that role.
Well, I would say to that point too, if you look at Priscilla, which I mean, Tu Wong Fu is ultimately a ripoff of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert in some ways. Those three, I think, are Priscilla was a big sleeper hit,
and it was certainly first, but
yeah. My point more than anything is just the three performances in Priscilla: Hugo Weaving, Guy Pearce, and Terrence Stamp go right. Like there is no. I don't believe that any of them are protecting their masculinity at all in that film.
That does feel like very similar to the beginning of the conversation, the difference between Australia and America, and particularly, what's that?
No, I agree. I mean, I just think we've sort of discussed this before, but like Australians just go fucking hog wild no matter what.
They go hard, man.
They're fucking crazy down under.
They're the greatest and best people in the world.
I love them.
And we fucking love those guys. But yeah, I think he did a really good job. The thing about this movie, and I don't want to be too hard on it because all right. So the director's name is Zan Wheeler. I don't know if we've mentioned that. The writer's name is Peggy Thompson. My sense is they wanted to make a movie about their friends. Like it's just that's how it feels. Like they just wanted to make a movie about their friends. Like they're obviously filmmakers, not to say they're not, but it's the kind of thing where they're sitting around and saying, "I think we're a movie." Like I think we're a movie, and and I think in their circle they had people like Francis, and they had people like Judy, and they had people like Tony, and they had that kind of thing. And Mom, exactly. And I think the people they didn't really have in their circle are the mom character and the brother character, who feel like they're flown in from the set of Leave It to Beaver or something.
Yeah, literally.
So
until they're the end.
Yeah.
And I do think, and I do think, sorry, Brooke, the last thing is I do think that the more kind of over the top elements that rub us all the wrong way do feel like they might just be kind of like grasps at relevancy, right? Like it is, as I said, Insecure. It's very hard to just make a movie about you and your friends, because like I was talking to someone today about yesterday about a movie I don't like at all, but some people like, about Kicking and Screaming, which is just a movie about your friends.
The Noah Baumbach movie.
Yes, and I think
the Will Ferrell one.
The Will Ferrell movie,
I was just being clear, Jordan.
I think that a movie like Kicking and Screaming to me is also let's just make a movie about us, right? Let's just make a movie about us, and I know a lot of people really ride for it, and it just, for me, it's like super boring, and I think a lot of these films are super boring. And if you don't put something in there that is kind of thematically elevated, you feel a little vulnerable, right? And I think that's what it is.
I think it's like you were saying this, and my brain is just like flashing lights saying like Kevin Smith, because it feels like that feels like all of his, like especially like the early movies for him. It's just like, what if I got a camera and I made some movies with my friends and we swore a lot, and like that feels like the queer version of like, this is like the queer version of that with like an explosion and a neo-Nazi added in.
But
do you know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah. I think that all I was going to say,
if it was more hangouty,
right? All I was going to say earlier is that I really like the sort of sense of wish fulfillment. I don't know if it's like strictly like the director and the writer's wish fulfillment, but queer wish fulfillment at the end of the movie, where your potentially homophobic family is actually totally cool with everything and really just wants you to be happy and supported. And I think that this movie is so incredibly well intentioned, and that it really just there is absolutely nothing but like the best of like feelings behind this movie. And I think you can really feel like the sincerity and the earnestness, which some people I think tend to knock cinema for, that like feels like too earnest, or like you put too much.
I mean, Kenny and I love a sincere movie. We have no
problem.
This
guy. Oh my god, it's
everything. The sincerity is the highest form of art. To have the guts to put it out there raw.
Yeah.
But I'll say this,
You know?
and I agree with you guys. I love a sincere movie as well, and I think this movie is sincere. But I also think that this movie wants to be a little audacious. It wants to be a little bit sort of like shocking is the wrong word, but just sort of being like
special.
Yeah, well, no, the after school specials are not audacious. I think that this movie's trying to kind of be a little cool, a little shocking at times. I think it's certainly more shocking in terms of its sort of playfulness about sexuality, right? I mean, the sex toys stuff, the butt plug stuff, the sex component of this movie is quite playful and quite sort of a little in your face at times. And I think that again doesn't totally jive with the sincerity and the open-heartedness and the heart on your sleeveness of the movie. They're kind of bumping up against each other, unfortunately.
Can I weirdly disagrei?
Sure.
Mwah.
You could disagree all you
Done
want.
it now, Phil.
Yeah,
Burning the fucking books.
I think that mostly because this is like, I think like a common sort of like issue that gets brought up in queer cinema is like, can it be sexy? If it's too sexy, are we saying that like everything queer is like related to sex? But if it's not sexy, are we saying that that's not a part of the thing? Because that tends to be like a lot of people who are slightly homophobic like hang up with like queerness in general is like the sex part. So I think that it's nice to kind of see a sincere movie that's also very sex forward. I completely agree that like there's a little
I think it's doing both. I don't think I don't think what you and I are saying are mutually exclusive is the point I'm trying to make. I think that because I think that, Kenny mentioned this earlier of like, we want to make a movie about us and we want to make a movie about like the shit that we do and just kind of, whatever. And I think that someone in that conversation is going to be like, yeah, but can the streets fucking handle it?
Right.
And I think that that's kind of infused in this too, of a little bit of like, we're going to give you a little bit of just how, sexy and what I think that there's mixed messages going on in this film in terms of its tone, in terms of, I don't necessarily think about what it wants to say, because I think what it wants to say is pretty much on its face. But I do think that in terms of how successful they wanted this film to be, what they were sort of hoping, what vein they were hoping to hit with it, is anyone's guess. I do think, that this movie was a pretty big deal in Canada. I mean, it actually did quite well. It played at a bunch of festivals. It was, named after a fucking Sarah McLachlan song.
We have to
a good Sarah McLachlan song. I love that in the Wikipedia plot synopsis, they say the clandestine romance introduces Maggie's family to a host of new experiences, many of which are quote unquote better than chocolate, which I think is ridiculous.
Butt plugs, better
Some
than chocolate.
old chocolate that's been out for a while. It's a little dusty.
There's also something amazing about the fact that at the very end of the movie, they obviously play the Sarah McLachlan song "Ice Cream," right? But rather than waiting to the verse where she says "Your love is better than chocolate," they jump ahead. So it's literally like we're thrown into the middle of the song so that we hear that line first.
Yep.
Which is ridiculous. I mean, whatever. It is what it is. I don't know. I think that there are far better movies about gay culture. I think there are far better movies in 1999 about gay culture than this film. But I also think that this movie deserves, a little bit of a tip of the hat to doing what it was doing when it was doing it.
Yeah.
There is a fearlessness to it, despite the fact that maybe it doesn't stick the landing entirely. I think it has some nice things to say. But I don't know. I mean, in terms of the films that we've covered thus far in 99, Kenny, but I'm a Cheerleader feels like the one that Brooke brought up, feels like maybe the most overt one that comes to mind.
Just about gayness?
Gay movies. I mean, Talented Mr. Ripley obviously is
Mr. Ripley.
Talented Mr. Ripley is obviously
perfect
fantastic
movie.
Fucking best.
I'm trying to think of other
but
ones.
I'm a Cheerleader as well. I mean, there's some that have
look this up.
The Matrix
kind of
right now.
Yeah,
I was going to
The
say
Matrix.
the Matrix in particular is certainly that, and
I mean,
Being John Malkovich is also a pretty gay movie.
Mhm.
But
I mean, definitely dealing with a lot of
American Beauty, but also I don't want to talk about the movie. Yuck.
The second time we brought that up today, Kenny.
Yucko.
Yucko.
Beau Travail is apparent. We've not covered that one yet, but that's good. But that's a good one.
We will get there.
All About My Mother is 99.
Oh yeah. Oh
yes. Big time. We did that. That obviously. I
mean, Cruel Intentions kind of deals with some of that.
Yes, it does.
Well.
Pivotal. We've talked about it.
How could you not?
Fight Club deals with it.
Fight Club, hella gay.
One of the gayest movies ever made.
What if I could be gay for myself?
But this is where sort of like the gay culture versus straight culture, mainstream versus indie conversation is really, because it's like, if I search 1999 gay movies, the Fight Club and The Matrix do not come up. However, better than Chocolate.
Well, but I think that's kind of what I was talking about with Wizard of Oz. Like, those movies are some of the gayest movies I've ever made, and they're also not about trauma. They're about kung fu.
Yeah.
So
sure,
The Wizard of Oz specifically.
I do want to just because I feel like I'd be remiss if we didn't at least just list some of the other ones from '99. Flawless was a big film dealing with obviously gay culture. Happy Texas is another one.
I guess we've done a lot.
There are a fair amount of them in '99, but yes, this is probably in the middle, I would say, in terms of a middling entry in the LGBTQ plus canon of 1999. Kenny, would you like to rate this film?
Sure.
I'm gonna let you go first on this one, Kenny.
Yeah,
would you say it is better or worse than chocolate?
Chocolate, well,
that's the rating for this film.
Definitely better than milk chocolate, which sucks. Worse than dark chocolate, which is good, and white chocolate, which is very good.
White chocolate is disgusting. I don't know how you eat white chocolate.
White chocolate
Kenny,
is horrible.
I will say I like baking with white chocolate, but
white chocolate's amazing.
But raw dogging white chocolate is a little unhinged.
Can I just say that we have devolved into rating chocolates right now?
Wait a second.
Look,
that's what happens when you
dark chocolate, some hazelnut, dark chocolate, cherries.
Relax. Hold on. I gotta get into this. Okay. I know that my white chocolate obsession, which is probably my favorite food, is highly controversial.
It's not as bad as being like mayonnaise is my favorite spice, but it's up there.
That's very gross. And I know that dark chocolate is the people's chocolate these days, and it is because it's
chocolate
fantastic.
du jour.
It's great,
but it's the people's chocolate. But milk chocolate, in particular, Hershey's chocolate, tastes like vomit.
Yes.
And I don't know how anybody. It is true, Phil, and actually, it's actually scientific.
You also think that cheese is disgusting.
You don't like cheese?
Well,
Sir.
cheese is literally disgusting. It's a mold, but that's not the point. I'm gonna get started.
This is so good.
What is happening here?
I'm gonna read something to you.
Is it the definition of fucking cheese?
All right.
Kenny got saying cheese. I don't mean to throw.
What is? You just did, but it's okay.
What is cheese?
What's not subjective, ladies and gentlemen, is the fact that butyric acid is found in milk, which is in Hershey's chocolate, and that butyric acid can create notes of sourness and tang, which, yes, some sensitive tasters or those used to European chocolate, like myself, could feel is reminiscent of vomit.
Kenny has a fancy palate, guys.
Where butyric acid also hangs out. So butyric acid is something that is in milk chocolate and also vomit. That's why milk chocolate. Actually, I've been wondering for years why I can't eat milk chocolate, because it's truly the most disgusting food there is.
I think that you're over. I think that you. By the way, and I genuinely didn't mean to throw Kenny under the bus on the cheese.
Oh, don't worry.
But I do want to just say this, which is that I do think that it is a known
vomit. I hate eating vomit.
There's a known. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, there are people that are sensitive to certain tastes and certain smells that do trigger things for them. So like I get where Kenny's coming from, but on a purely just taste level, white chocolate's fucking gross. So that's just
weird to me.
Do you guys not
white
like a white chocolate and cranberry like cookie?
No, we're just talking about like strictly. Also, doesn't white chocolate have?
Why are you looking at me like I'm a fucking idiot? Have you not had it?
That's how Kenny looks at everybody, though.
Yeah, that's Kenny's.
Yeah, I was like, are you not?
He's looking up something. He's looking up something. I think
that's my face. And that's actually one of my worst traits is.
When you're in the room, people can tell that you don't like an idea.
A friend of mine. It's not people can tell, dude. It's like my friend, Manny Figueroa, who's been on the podcast many times. He's a good friend of mine. It took we were right on a show together, and it took him like 3 months, and he's just like, a lot of the girls think you think they're stupid, but like I keep trying to tell them like that's just your face. He's like, it's wild. He's like, this is just you. You have like resting asshole face, and I'm like, that's unfortunate for me.
No,
I don't think you have a resting asshole face, but I'll just say this because I we've been in many rooms together, and some people do have a resting sort of like they furrow their brows when they're thinking, and as you know, when you're pitching in a room, it's very performative, and there's a it can be a little nerve-wracking. So when someone's like got this like crinkled brow, you're just like, what? You don't like it? You don't like what I'm pitching? It can get into your head.
I think I have this like.
Ever since I started doing Zooms in general, and I always have the little box with my face, the hide self view is for some people, not for me. I have to do this like kind of performative, like tiny little like half smile because I look extremely. I have resting bitch face. I'm part of.
No, you don't. You're
I don't think so.
You've never seen me not.
Oh, we haven't seen it. We haven't seen it. Okay,
guys, I thought Brooke hated me for 17 years.
Yeah.
That's a resting. Really? That's a fucking mean face.
That is my like actual.
Wait. Let me see your resting face.
This is so great for the audience.
Let's see your resting face.
The Patreon people.
Yeah, the Patreon.
Yeah.
Like, if I do nothing.
I guess. When I was in mental health treatment for being crazy, one of the things you learn when you're there is something that really helps you.
Yeah.
Is a Mona Lisa smile.
Yeah.
That just rock just in general, it makes you feel better. Just a little Mona Lisa smile all the time, or as often as you can, actually is that and your hands open. So I try to do that, but I feel like the Joker.
You look a little uncomfortable. Anyway.
What's your rating on this film, Kenny?
How many things of white chocolate?
72 white chocolate snow caps.
Okay.
Before I'm gonna go down to like 65. I think that's where this movie lives for me. It's hard to hate something with such good intentions. It's hard to hate something that seems like nice people trying to make a nice movie about other nice people. And I didn't hate it. I actually think there are moments that are really inspired. So and I think we didn't talk a lot about the leads, but I thought the girl who played Maggie was really winning. And I like that. I like the aesthetic. I think it's a great movie. I mean, a good movie. It's a 65.
Brooke?
I am actually totally aligned with Kenny. I think 65 is the perfect rating for how I feel about this. About 65% of this movie, I'm very on board with, and the remaining 35%, I can't do math. I am really not. But again, I do think that like it is very winning a lot of the time, and I think a very sweet movie, aptly named, for the most part. So I'll stick with the 65. Oh, don't boo me. You've done worse.
No, I have.
All right, Jordan, your turn.
I guess my first question is, I've been thinking about this the whole podcast, is like, I feel like the bookstore owner would be pretty upset about how willy-nilly they are about like using their books for like art. Like when she puts all the books in like the ice thing and they're burning books, it just felt like a lot of money being burned on books.
I agree.
And that's been like weighing on me for this podcast, and I just needed to say it.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, I'm subtracting the books from my final score. I'm I don't know. I think I didn't like it as much as other people. Maybe that's just because I was bumping on some of the other stuff and the tonal whiplash to the neo-Nazis at the end. Really, it kind of
judge you.
It doesn't leave you with as warm of a taste as you start with the chocolate. Like, like you get that first bite of chocolate and it's really good, but then you eat the whole bar in one sitting and you're kind of like, you don't feel as good as you did when you started. And that's kind of this movie.
I can't believe you booed me for just saying.
Yeah, seriously, your metaphor got
something sweet. Jesus. Anyway,
I think it's a pretty apt comparison. I'm just saying. So I'm gonna go with like 55.
You can't eat too much white chocolate.
55.
That's not that mean. That's not that mean.
Yeah.
Okay.
You oversold it.
Well, okay. So
that's pretty mean.
I came into this podcast at a 70. I'm gonna hold it a 70. I'm first of all, the Canadian in me is being a little bit.
I was gonna make a joke, and it's real. I was gonna say that's the Canadian surtax, but
yeah, there's a little bit of the Canadian surtax. I mean, ultimately, I think that. And you mentioned it earlier, Kenny, that we really didn't talk that much about the leads. Karen Dwyer, who is really, really lovely in this film, and is no longer with us, unfortunately, is really, really charming, really winning, watchable. I'm surprised that she didn't have a bigger career coming off of this film, quite frankly. And I think that she just made a lot of it kind of palatable for me in a weird way. That, not to say that Kim was bad, that Christina Cox, who plays Kim, was bad. I felt like she was a little bit more one note. I felt like Maggie had a bunch of different things she had to do. I just think ultimately, you said it best, Kenny, like, best of intentions. I think this movie it's a sweet, good-hearted movie that's trying to sort of just, be a nice film about, how gay people are really nice and horny. And that's, what's wrong with that, right? So that's where I fall in this. But more than anything, we'd like to thank you for coming on to talk about Better Than Chocolate with us. And I actually, while we have you, the episode's over, but there's a movie that Kenny and that I forgot about, that Kenny brought to my attention, that I watched the trailer for the other night, called Body Shots, that is a 99 film. You've seen this film, Kenny? Have you seen Body Shots?
No, but it was a real film.
It was a real film. The trailer for this movie, can you just bring it up on YouTube and read aloud the quote at the beginning of the trailer? Because I don't know if Kenny's seen it.
Can we just talk about? Oh, sorry. Are you pulling the trailer up?
I'm not. But I
pull
will.
the trailer.
I'm
on the letterbox, and I was just reading the
I was reading the
slug line.
Yeah.
Where tonight it's for sex, tomorrow it's for real, and then just like I looked at the cast.
I'll just say this: the trailer.
I got it.
Are you watching the trailer?
Okay.
It literally goes like.
Do it. The 60s, The Graduate, 70s, Saturday Night Fever, 80s, The Breakfast Club.
Body Shots is what they think is on par with these movies?
This is a
So
film,
the movies that defined the decade: Graduate in the
Generation.
60s, Saturday Night Fever in the 70s, Breakfast Club in the 80s, and Body Shots in the 90s. So here's the question: what's the right answer?
This is a movie about how a group of friends is torn apart after one accuses another of rape.
Correct.
Oh, I can't wait to watch this movie.
Yeah.
That sounds like so
that's why
much fun.
the reason I bring this up, Kenny, is
Holy shit.
reason is I think Brooke and Jordan need to come on for Body Shots. I think that they would be perfect guests for
We would love to
This
have
is
you.
the
of
most
course.
upsetting trailer I've seen in my life, and I have no sound on.
I know you all are funny people, but I'm going to ask you to be sincere because it's the highest form of art right now.
So not the Judd Apatow movie?
I'm listening. I'm listening.
Buddy people, I get it.
Seriously.
I need to watch a movie with my daughter starting now. She is 10 years old. She likes YA shit. She just binged all Stranger Things. She is on a kind of horror kick, but like we're not going too horror. She wanted me to pick the movie.
What do you got?
I haven't picked it yet. That's what I'm asking. I want your help.
Like introductory horror.
So her favorite movie is Happy Death Day, to give you a sense of like.
Oh,
what about like Poltergeist?
She's like in.
Have you watched Freaky yet?
Yeah, I love Freaky.
Have you shown her Fear Street yet?
Oh, Fear Street's interesting.
Fear Street too much?
Fear Street's kind of
Fear
brutal
Street's a
with
little
the
gory.
head through the thing.
Yeah.
Like
Through
that.
a meat
I
grinder.
would not show my kid that.
All right,
intense.
all right. Well,
I
I think
I-
Poltergeist is
10?
pretty mild, though, right?
I can't do
Poltergeist is mild.
Poltergeist. I can't. I think
I feel like we're
Poltergeist
looking
actually
for,
will
like,
kind of mess her up.
Fun, scary.
Fun.
I don't know. I don't want to recommend Scream. I feel like
Ha-
it's too obvious.
That's too much.
I watched it with my son, who
Okay.
watches everything. We just watched. We binge
Okay.
Breaking Bad. Who's the same age? It's 10-year-old.
Oh my God.
I'm just a great dad.
This is what
Uh,
I wanted growing up. I was doing this on my own.
Freaky's not a bad idea, actually.
Freaky.
But I don't want to watch the
is-
movie I've seen.
Right.
Would you want to watch it?
10
It's like one of my
It's
son's
fucking
favorite
dark,
movies.
No.
dude. You're
We're
gonna show
looking
her
for, like,
it?
Fun.
Well,
No,
Rollins
no,
is
I'm
fine.
looking at fun.
Element.
Evil Dead 2? That's like
Oh.
a blast.
Do you need to watch the first Evil?
Drag
No,
Me to
no.
Hell.
Drag-
Oh my
oh.
God.
I really think we can watch Evil Dead 2?
Evil Dead 2 is like not bad at all. It's like a cartoon.
Same with
Yeah.
Drag Me to Hell.
Yeah.
No, Drag Me to Hell. I don't
Drag Me
think
to Hell
she
is like
would
is
love.
a block,
I think she
though.
really likes. Really really cute girls in the lead.
Oh,
Like the girl in
Happy
Drag Me to
Death
Hell
Day.
type.
Yeah.
Sorry, Drag Me. Not that the girl in Happy Death
What
Day
about
isn't
like
cringe.
Escape
Drag Me to
Room.
Hell isn't cute.
or like a
Wow.
Final Destination?
Maybe Final Destination.
That movie,
I think-
honestly, that's like a traumatizing thing though. Like I was scared of cars with logs for like 30 years.
Okay.
So,
And escalators?
yeah,
The
like,
irony,
fuck that shit.
irony of the whole thing is like she's a genuinely terrified person, scared of
Interesting.
everything. But all the great horror movie fans generally are.
Yeah.
I think that's part of it. It's like
Yeah.
immersion therapy.
Absolutely.
So, but
That's-
she's scared
okay.
of everything. Now let's see if
Well,
any
let
of these
me know what you
fly.
pick. I'm curious.
Yeah.
All right, guys.
Gremlins 2.
Body Shots is coming up. I'll let you.
Gremlins too. Maybe
Oh,
we'll just
do Body
Evil
Shots.
Dead.
It's
Evil
gonna
Dead's
be
a good one.
Evil Dead. My final recommendation is Zombieland. A little bit of a
Zombieland
joke,
is
but
not a
has
bad
a very
idea.
That's
cute
interesting.
girl in the
Does
lead.
have a cute girl.
A
Emma
cute,
Stone,
a cute girl she knows too.
And
She loves
Actor
that.
President.
Loves La La Land.
And we need to do it on our podcast so you can take notes. There you go.
All right.
It's a 2009
Peace
movie.
out.
All right. All right. Bye, guys.
I like
Talk
it.
to you soon.
Podcast like it's 1999. Podcast like it's. You want the